Hello and welcome to the 8th episode of Knit with Juliette's knitting podcast. If you're new here, my name is Juliette and I'm a PhD student who likes to knit a lot in her spare time, and I'm based in Cambridge, UK. If you're not new here, welcome back to my channel. So today's episode, we have one finished object to go through and 3 works in progress. And I'm also going to be talking about some future plans because I'm going on a trip very soon and I'm planning to get some yarn during that trip, so I can talk about that. It's going to be quite a short episode today because I don't have too many projects to go through. And some of the projects I've already mentioned in the past in some previous episodes. Before I jump into the video, I just wanted to quickly mention what I'm wearing today. This is, if you've caught my Everything I Knit in 2024 video, this is the first project that I ever finished in 2024. It's the Fennel Seed jacket handmade by Florence, which is this beautiful broken rib raglan cardigan. And it's knitted with Gepard Garn Woolia held with Drops Kid Silk, and they're both in just like the basic white color. And I'm using these kind of mother of pearl buttons as the buttons for this cardigan, which I found in this random haberdashery as well. It was a pretty cold day today in Cambridge, so that's why I chose to wear this with a little button down shirt. So let's move on to the first finished object. So the first finished object is something that I actually don't have with me because it was a gift knit. And this is something that I've already mentioned in a previous knitting podcast. And it's one of my most difficult knits that I've done in a while. This is the April cardigan, but I've knitted this in a fingering weight gauge, and that makes the whole difference because also it was knitted with black yarn, which is notoriously hard to knit with. And the fact that it's fingering weight, and the fact that I don't even get to keep this piece because it's a gift for one of my best friends. It was all a bit of a difficult project, but the end product was so worth it because I used Knitting for Olive Merino. This is the color Licorice, which is just their basic black color. And it just made for the softest, most drapiest garment that I've ever knitted. And I think it's really worth knitting something in a fingering weight gauge because it just makes for something that's so incredibly soft. Really warm as well, even though it's quite thin because it's merino yarn and all of its good, temperature regulating properties means that this makes for such a perfect staple basic piece in your wardrobe. I specifically made this cardigan in a fingering weight yarn for my best friend because she requested something that she could easily bring with her, like stuff a cardigan in a bag when she wants an extra piece of layer. She always said that she had this problem where she wanted something that works as a in-between layer between whatever she's wearing and her coat, that she could bring extra just in case she needs a bit of extra warmth, but she could also easily kind of travel with. And so the fingering weight, a thin cardigan, was the choice that she made, and I proposed to her and she was okay with. I showed her some examples of cardigans that I could knit for her, and we ended up landing on the April cardigan, which is a pattern by Petite Knit. It's a very famous pattern, and I think for good reason. I think a lot of knitters, especially I see on YouTube, end up knitting this cardigan at some point by Petite Knit. And I have to say, I understand the hype. It's a really good pattern. Any of the Petite Knit patterns are very reliable. I'm never disappointed by any of her patterns. I know what I'm getting, and I know her instructions are going to be very clear. I've already touched on this in a previous episode. It's a very interesting construction where it works with a bit like a raglan shaping with the sleeve part and the front panel and the back panel. But you've got this slight saddle shoulder construction at first. Then you kind of increase only for the sleeve part. And then at the end, around this part of the underarm, you start increasing on both the body part and the sleeve part before you separate for sleeves and continue straight for the body and separately for the sleeve. So I had to do a lot of maths to convert this pattern into a fingering weight gauge pattern because the original pattern is for a DK weight yarn combination. I know that a lot of people do a fingering weight in mohair combination, and so that's what the pattern calls for initially actually. So it's a 21 stitch gauge pattern, which I converted into I think a 26 stitch gauge. It's a bit complicated to explain, and I tried to explain it in my previous video, but basically when you want to convert gauge, you want to convert all the stitch counts that appear in your pattern into what would be appropriate given your gauge. And then because you do increases, you have to adjust the number of increases to reach the number of stitches that you're supposed to get given your different gauge. So that's how I did, and that's how I converted the pattern. And it worked out really well. I had no fit issues whatsoever with the cardigan. I made sure to film myself a lot wearing it before I gifted it to my friend. And so I hope I can include some of this footage here. And so yeah, no fit issues at all by converting it this way. I think it's also because my row gauge proportionally was not too different to the original row gauge. So by that I mean the 21 stitch to 28 stitch ratio horizontally, I think that ratio was about the same for whatever the original row gauge was versus my row gauge. And I think that's why everything turned out well. You might want to check, if you're doing this conversion, whether this ratio horizontally holds vertically, because then if it doesn't, you might have some issues with the depth of the yoke, basically, when you do the conversion into this different gauge. So I already converted one of my knitting friends into doing this bringing weight April cardigan specifically as well. She's also knitting it in Knitting for Olive Merino. And I was texting her when I finished my cardigan and saying, girl, you're going to love this cardigan because it's so good and I'm so sad I'm giving it away. But the friend who's receiving it is very knit worthy and she was so excited to get it. So I'm very happy for that. I also posted the cardigan on my Instagram account and I was surprised by how many people loved and commented about the star-shaped buttons that I chose for the cardigan. I chose it because it was kind of inspired by this brand that both my friend and I really like, which is called Zadig and Voltaire. It's a French brand and some of their iconic kind of branding includes these like star-shaped things, like star patches and things like that on jumpers. So I was kind of inspired by that because we both like this brand. And when I saw these buttons in my local John Lewis, I was like, perfect. She likes glitter. This is a really cute shape. She wanted something fun for the buttons. She didn't want just some basic buttons. So she was like, choose for me. I trust your judgment. And I chose the star buttons and she really likes them. Although they're a little bit difficult to pull through the buttonholes, I would say, because they have a slightly odd shape. But anyway, she loved it, but apparently so did you guys, because on Instagram, everyone was commenting saying, love the star buttons. And I think this is such a great way of elevating a really basic piece, because with the black cardigan, it's such a staple wardrobe piece. But if it was just normal buttons, I think it would just be that, a basic piece. But the fact that it has these star buttons makes it that much more whimsical and that much more fun. So I think that was a really cute choice. I really hope that she gets to wear that cardigan a lot. So a notable modification that I made to that pattern, other than the gauge change, is the double knit button band, just like on this cardigan. A lot of people make this change, I've mentioned this before. If you see a lot of the April cardigan projects on Ravelry, a lot of people will mention that they've made this change of doing the button band double knitting instead of the rib as the original pattern calls for. I think it's really good to do that change because I think it elevates your cardigan a little bit more, because my friend also said that she wanted something that she could wear for work, and I think the double knit button band looks a tiny bit more professional than the ribbed button band. So that was the choice I made and I think it was a really good one. Although, oh my goodness, I think honestly I was at some point working until midnight a few days before I had to go to London to see this friend to finally give her cardigan because, oh, I forgot to mention that this was originally a birthday gift and I gave it to her 4 months late to her birthday. I had seen her twice because we don't live in the same city. I had seen her twice after her birthday and both those times I thought I would have the cardigan ready for her and I didn't. So this time around, before I left for my trip, I really wanted to get it done and give it to her because otherwise it would be kind of sort of it would be just a bit rude for her. And so like I was scrambling and the bane of my existence was doing that double knitted button band because it takes a stupendous amount of time. And on top of that, the fact that it was on fingering weight yarn, so I had to do it on 2.5mm needles. yeah, I thought I it took me a really, really long time. It took me so much more time than I expected it to. So yeah, beware if you're doing this pattern the same way I did with the fingering weight yarn. The double knitting will take a really long time, and you have to account for that. So the sleeves went by pretty quickly. That's why I was like, oh, cool, sleeves done, body done. Only the double knitted button band to do now. And that took like a whole 3 weeks or something. It was ridiculous. Anyway, I'm really glad that that's done now because it means that I finally get to work on other projects. Except not really, because now I have to do another gift knit, which is yet another April cardigan. So this is going to be my second April cardigan. So let's move on to works in progress. All this yapping is making me thirsty. So this is the second April cardigan that I'm knitting now, but this time I am knitting it with DK weight yarn. So this second April cardigan is for my other best friend. It was also her birthday a few months ago, and she also requested a cardigan. She didn't mind the fact that it wouldn't be fingering weight yarn. I asked her, can I just knit this in a DK weight yarn, because it will mean that you have a cardigan sooner. And also I think it's absolutely, like, the DK weight garment is a good thickness. It's not too warm. I had knit her in the past for another birthday a very chunky jumper, and so I think she didn't want anything as thick basically for this time around, but a DK weight was perfectly fine. So this is my little swatch. It's a very, very lovely color that she picked. It's a Caribbean blue melange by Porcelain of Veta. I've worked with this yarn before to make these kind of modified penny gloves that I put mock cables on based on the Mountain Walk socks pattern handmade by Florence. I forgot how soft it was. This is incredibly soft. It's a merino superwash wool, 80% and 20% nylon. So Filgana Arvetta is actually technically a sock yarn, but I feel like I've seen a lot of projects being done on garments using Arvetta. I think it's quite a popular choice because it's relatively inexpensive for how soft it is and how like high quality it is, and there's a really large range of colors. And so what I'm doing to basically make it a DK weight garment is I'm holding it double stranded. I met the right stitch count right away with 4mm needles, so that was great. And this is the progress that I've made. So this is actually going so fast, and I don't know if it's because I was working with the fingering weight yarn prior, so everything feels like suddenly incredibly faster, or if it's just my normal rate of knitting. But I have been knitting quite a bit of this because there's been a lot of waiting around for code to run with my PhD work. So whenever the code is running, I try to do some other bits of PhD work, but sometimes it just isn't anything that I can do until the code runs. So I have had a lot of time to knit on this project while wait for that to go and work. So I'm basically done with the yoke essentially, which is crazy because I've only been knitting this since a week ago. So this is like one of the fastest I've ever done a yoke. So as I mentioned, this is the interesting construction with the saddle shoulder and then the kind of set in sleeve here that's done by increasing only on the sleeve side before you do these rapid increases on both sides of the sleeve and the body. So I'm literally about to split for the sleeve. I still have 2 increase rows left to do before I can split for sleeves. This color is showing up really beautifully on camera, and I think it's quite true to life. Perhaps there's a slightly more green undertone in real life than what is shown on camera. But as I mentioned, it's the color Caribbean blue, which is the color 811, and they called it a melange color. This is sometimes what's next to the Arvetta color names, because it means that there's a slight kind of grayish variegation in the yarn, but it's super, super subtle. But looking at it, you can tell that it's not like just a solid one color yarn. And I think it's nice because it gives a nice depth to the color and the garment. So I'm really, really happy with this. And I just love how it feels. Another thing that I wanted to know is that I also thought that holding 2 strands together was going to cause me some issues in terms of how fast I can knit with it because the yarn might split and stuff, but actually I have no such problems, and this has been a really, really smooth knitting experience. I really, really love knitting with this yarn, with these needles as well. These are the C-Knit Koshitsu needles, because everything is just gliding so smoothly. So this has been a really, really pleasant experience. So highly recommend, and it's working out really well for this April cardigan number 2. And I'm actually thinking that I might make one for myself, because it would be super nice to have a really basic cardigan, which I don't. Like the cardigans that I do have, that I have knitted, for example, this one or my Maple wrap cardigans, they're not like basic. I guess this you could consider basic, but this was like, this still has this kind of interesting stitch pattern. But I don't have a stockinette plain cardigan. And the way my first friend's black cardigan fit on me and felt, and I could style it, I love that look. And I'm going to be so jealous of this one as well. So I really think that at some point I need to knit myself a Naples cardigan. And probably in the same yarn combination than Porcelain Arvetta, because I just love how it feels against my skin. I just love how it knits up. And there's a lot of color options, which means that I think I could find myself a nice neutral color, because I'm quite basic in my wardrobe color choices, and knit myself up a really nice April cardigan. So this is going very well. I'm actually filming a project vlog to go with this, because I thought, why not? It's a nice project to work on, and also quite a popular pattern, so I think people would be quite interested in seeing the process and stuff, because they might be either familiar with it, or they might be thinking of knitting it because they've seen it so much. And I'm also actually counting the number of hours that I'm spending working on this project, because I wanted for once to kind of really understand how many hours it actually takes to make these things, just to give myself an idea. So I have this weird app that's actually, I think, designed for consultants or people who do client work, so that they can put in their hours for the clientele to build them, basically. But this was introduced to me by a friend from my PhD, who uses it to calculate the number of hours he spends working on his PhD to keep himself accountable. And I started doing that myself, and I thought, why not I add my knitting hours in there to see how much time I spend on it. So that's exactly what I'm doing, and I'll report back, and you'll probably see it on the project vlog as well, how many hours it took me to knit this cardigan. Those were the 2 April cardigans, and the next project I'm going to talk about today is actually something that has already featured in, I think, my 2 previous podcast episodes. Still haven't made much progress on it, and it's my Porcelain Cardigan 2.0, as I like to call it. So if you haven't caught any of my previous episodes, I've basically knitted one of these porcelain cardigans. Have I been saying porcelain cardigan? I've been saying cardigan because I've been talking too much about the 2 April cardigans. I'm so sorry. This is the porcelain sweater. For those of you who are new to this channel, I knitted a porcelain sweater back in last winter around February, March time. And I knitted it off gauge, and so it has ended up being a bit too small. It fits me, but it's just not the intended ease that I had wanted. And so I'm making the second one, this time being very, very careful with gauge and tension, to make sure that it's the super oversized, lofty sweater that I originally wanted. And I'm also doing it in a different color scheme. I love green. I think green is one of my favorite colors when it comes to garments. I kept seeing these Instagram pictures of people who had done the porcelain sweater in this color combination. I did my first one in white and blue, cobalt blue, which is kind of the original porcelain color. And I really like that one, but for my second one, I really wanted to go for this green and white combination. I've already shown how this much on camera. I really haven't made that much progress. I've finished the back section essentially, which is looking super nice, and I love how it's picking up on camera. But the front section had a bit of trouble, and I am happy to announce that I'm a knitter who doesn't make too many mistakes whilst knitting, or usually if I do, I catch them early enough that I can fix them. But this is actually the first time I've made like a major mistake, which has led me to kind of frog stuff and start over. So I didn't quite start over the whole thing, but I did have to start over one of the front sections. I believe it was the front right that I had to start over. And the reason I did was because I forgot one of the increases on the neck here. I'm sorry if you hear the needles sinking on my desk. I forgot to do one of the increases by the neck slope right here, which led to me starting this colorwork section right around where I am right now, and then realized that actually the stitch count didn't match up with the colorwork chart. I was one stitch short on the color chart basically. And I didn't realize this at first because I was just doing these alternating stitches. I wasn't paying attention. And then I was doing the next set of this colorwork chart. And yeah, I realized that I was missing a stitch. And I counted my stitches on the whole front section. And I was supposed to have 120 stitches. And I had 121. And I realized this also when I was on a call with my knitting friend who we're doing this porcelain knit along with. And I was like, oh my God, I think I have to frog. And she was like, oh no. But the great thing about calling a friend to knit together on the same project is that she really motivated me to like deal with the problem right there and then instead of like procrastinating it. So I went through the whole process of frogging and finding my mistake and getting back to that stage. So all in all, I am back to where I was before I had to frog this kind of right section to fix that mistake. So this is the last bit of color work that you do in the porcelain sweater where it's still, you have to do standard color work on the wrong side. And then after you finish this color work part, which is exactly the same as the back here, you finally join in the round, so you never have to do color work on the wrong side ever again. Actually, I bought this little tool. So I knit continental style, which is when you're holding the yarn on the left hand and you kind of grab the yarn with the right needle instead of English style where you kind of move the yarn around the needle. I don't know if that made sense. But basically, the great thing about continental style knitting is that for color work, you can hold the two strands in the same hand and you don't have to drop them. So I think that kind of like saves time and so it makes it a little bit quicker. So I remember my first porcelain sweater going much quicker than I expected in terms of, that was my first color work sweater as well. And it went quicker than I expected. And I think it's because of the fact that I knit continental and it's quite useful when you're doing stranded color work. However, I was having this issue where whenever I was on the wrong side, I had my two yarns kind of like merged together. So it was really hard to pick the right one with my right needle when I was about to purl it. So I ended up finding this thimble, which is kind of like, I think mine is slightly broken, but it still works, so it's fine. It's this kind of thimble thing where you put your strands. So this technically can hold 4 strands. And then you kind of lock them in place so that you are keeping your 2 strands for your color work with your contrast color and your main color separated from each other. So it makes it easier to pick the right yarn. And so it also makes it easier for me to tension my yarn correctly, both yarns on the same tension, because previously without this, I was having to wrap my yarn. Let me see if I can show you an example of what that means. So without this thimble, I was having to wrap my yarn on different fingers, which meant that I was having to kind of split them like this. I'm not sure if that's making much sense. But with the thimble, I place my yarn so that they're separated, and then I wrap them around the fingers as if it was one strand, so I can hold the tension evenly for both strands. So this is how it's looking like. And so it's much easier for me to then kind of pick which yarn I want to be knitting with, thanks to this thimble. So if you're kind of uncomfortable with stranded color work, or if you just want to make it a bit easier on yourself, I highly recommend getting a tool like this. I think this was like a basic Adi brand thimble. I know there's a lot of brands who do this. There's some that are kind of ring shaped where there's 2 loops that are kind of on opposing ends or diagonal to each other, and you can thread the yarn through each of those loops to separate them. I originally wanted something like that, but I ended up finding that in a random haberdashery store, so I ended up going with this, and it was honestly a really good purchase because I think it's made my stranded color work a lot easier on myself. Both just kind of trying to keep an even tension, but also it feels a lot less harder, so I'm more likely to work on this project, if that makes sense. So the yarn I'm using, I've already mentioned in some previous podcasts, but it's Tin Peer Gint and the color 8082. This is the original yarn that the pattern calls for, and I'm also using Tin Peer Gint for the contrast color, this is the color 1002. And then for the mohair, I'm using Filca and Attilia in these two colors. So the green is color 124 and the white is color 100. Really love this combination. I raved about this yarn combination in my previous podcast episode. I'm so looking forward to blocking this because already on the blocked swatch, I can feel how soft this yarn combination is going to be. So I'm really looking forward to having this as a sweater and it being like the coziest, softest sweater ever, and also with this really lovely color work as well. I just love how it looks on camera. I can't stop staring at just how lovely this color work is and this contrast as well. My partner recently changed the light in our bedroom, so it's much more neutral colored now, like a white light, but we can change it to be warmer. For today's video's sake, I put it on like a hospital light mode, which is very white, so that the true colors are really shown through the camera today. So the last project I'm going to talk about today is my berries and bird tracks socks. So let me actually show it flat. So this is a cabled sock pattern by Yuka, which is really famous Japanese sock designer. And she's quite famous for these really intricate cabled socks patterns. And these are knitted toe up, which is a first for me. And I think I've really enjoyed the process of knitting socks toe up like this. This project has made an appearance in my previous podcast episodes. It's knitted in Market Town Yarns sock yarn in the March 2024 colorway. So this is a subscription-based sock yarn. They do exist in a non-subscription format. It's just this is the one that I got from the subscription from the shop called Yarnworks, which is in Hadley, it's about an hour and a drive away from Cambridge. They're a really lovely shopkeeper. It's a business owned by a couple, and they do both the shop and the yarn dyeing as well. And they've supported me in the past by sponsoring the yarn for my PhD vest. It's a really wonderful brand. I highly suggest you check out their hand-dyed yarns and Yarnworks, which is the shop as well. So I really like this March colorway. It reminds me of daffodils, which is something that I've mentioned previously as well. These I called my dopamine socks previously because it was a time, I think I started knitting on this like in June last year. I was really ill and I was in bed all day, and I just wanted a boost of dopamine because I was feeling quite sad about being cooped up. And so what better way than picking up a really happy colored yarn like this? It's really cute. And it has this slight kind of stripy effect. This is purely just from the variegation of the yarn, but I find it quite endearing. It doesn't take away from the cabled pattern because it's light colored enough. The color is light enough that it doesn't hide the cable pattern, which is this really wonderful kind of crisscross diamonds with these little baubles followed with these laddered mock cables on the side as well. I'm doing everything on these 9-inch circular needles, including the heel flap and gusset. The only thing that I have to have a different needle for is when you're starting the toe. I have to use magic loop for that because the circumference is just too small. And oh, I forgot to mention, the pattern is from the book's 52 Weeks of Socks. Can't remember if it was volume 1 or 2. I think it's volume 2 because I remember I had freshly gotten that book and I wanted to knit a pattern from that book when I was feeling sad and I wanted to use this yarn. So yeah, I think it's volume 2. Pattern by Yuka, as I mentioned. And so I hadn't shown these on my podcast in a long time, I think. And the reason they're back is because, as I mentioned, I had a lot of waiting around for my code recently with my PhD work. And I was making good progress on that second April cardigan, but I wanted to bring something a bit more portable, and that's why I brought these socks, which had been, a whip since last June, so I thought they deserved a little bit of love. And also I've been wearing So I only have 3 pairs of knitted socks in my wardrobe. That's the extent of my sock knitting, even though I have a lot of sock yarn, partly because I am on this subscription. And I thought like I need to knit more socks and I need to finish these off because these are so cute and they deserve to be finished and they deserve to be worn. So I really am gonna try to get a bit more into sock knitting. A quick acquisition update. I received my January 2025 yarn subscription from Market Towns Yarns. Today's January 30th, so I feel like I'm not like spoiling anyone by showing the January color now. It's this really, really beautiful bluish purple mixed with this really cute coral, almost coral pink with some slight speckles. I really am interested in what the inspiration was behind this colorway. It's going to be such a cute color. So you know what I've noticed is that I knitted with one of these subscription yarns once before to make a pair of socks, and I had quite a bit of leftover. I think I had about 25 grams left over from this 100-gram hank. This is the 7th subscription yarn that I've received. So I feel like if I have enough of these, I could make some sort of blanket. And I was actually looking at Yarny Annie's, I believe that's her Instagram. She was talking about how she had too many sock yarns, which is also a problem that I have, and how she wants to use them up in not just socks but other projects as well. So I think I've been seeing a lot of Stella blanket quilts or cushions made from minis of hand-dyed yarns. I had already planned to make a sweet shop blanket with the advent calendar that I received from the Camel's Yarn, which I'll include a picture of here. I'm keeping it nice and secure in its packaging before I eventually start knitting on that sweet shop blanket. So that's one blanket that I could make out of these hand-dyed yarns. But the rest of these sock yarns, which I'm going to eventually have leftovers of because I never used the whole 100 grams to make a pair of socks, I think I eventually want to knit up in some sort of Stella blanket quilt or some other like cushions that are cushion patterns that are based off using up your leftovers like this. So yeah, definitely an interesting one. But this color anyway is showing up super nicely on camera. Really looking forward to knitting this up as well. So I'm actually going to Japan in 3 days. So if you didn't know this about me, I'm half Japanese. I was born in Japan and moved out there when I was 10 years old, but I still have my grandmother living there. And we try to make a point of going back to Japan with my family every so often. So this is the first time I'm going in 2 years. And it's also the first time I'm going with my partner who's never been to Japan before. Now, for that trip, I'm definitely planning to bring the April cardigan, but I'm also wondering if I should bring some sock yarn, and I want to see how much of that sock yarn I can knit up during the trip. But then again, I feel like I should just focus on finishing up the cardigan. And on a 2-week trip with 2 long haul, 13-hour flights, there's definitely plenty of time to be knitting, but I also have plenty of progress to do with that April cardigan, which I think will be enough because I have this tendency to bring like 3 projects on the trip, and then I just ended up knitting like 2 rows on it. I think it's because I'm worried that I'm not going to have any knitting to do because suddenly I run out of something. I think because that has literally never happened in my life. I think because I've never had this problem happen in my life ever, where I go on a trip and suddenly all the knitting is used up and I have no knitting to do, I might as well just like bring just the one project. And worst case scenario, I am planning to buy some yarn when I'm in Tokyo, and I'm also going to be in Kyoto. If I do end up running out of knitting to do, because somehow I finish the cardigan or I run out of yarn, I can just start knitting on the stuff that I buy in Japan. And let's just leave it at that. I think I'm like worried for nothing. But I don't know, like, tell me in the comments like how many knitting projects you actually bring with you whenever you go on a trip. And tell me like how many days that trip was. I think the worst I've done once is I brought 3 knitting projects for a trip that was maybe like a week long. I don't know in what delusional state I was that I thought, oh yeah, definitely gonna make loads of progress on those 3 garment projects. in the span of a week. But yeah, it's so weird. It's so weird how hard it is to plan for the amount of knitting you're going to do on the holiday. Yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments. So I'm also planning to be doing a little kind of a knitter in Tokyo type of video because I really am interested in the knitting scene in Tokyo and Kyoto. I've already started looking at yarn shops that I can visit. There's a particular brand called Walnut. This is a yarn shop company that sells a lot of European brands in Japan. And also, they sell some hand-dyed yarns that's made by them. And the brand is called Amirisu, which literally means a knitted or knitting squirrel. So that's really cute. And the brand logo is a squirrel as well. So I am planning to visit those yarn stores. The Kyoto one is the flagship. There's also a place in Tokyo where you can find some C-net needles, which are originally Japanese. I already own some fixed circular C-net needles and I've really loved them. And I also have the knitting friend who I'm knitting the porcelain sweater with. She is thinking about getting some C-net needles. So I might be getting like an order request from her to bring some C-net needles back. So we'll see. But I'll definitely try to get all of that on video of me visiting these different yarn shops and make a bit of a knitting vlog, a knitter in Tokyo type of vlog. So that and the project vlog for my friend's April cardigan are some of the non-podcast videos that are coming up on my channel. Make sure that you give this channel a subscribe to catch these videos when they come out and also watch my knitting podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I know it was a bit shorter than the usual ones, but I think it's good to kind of keep you guys updated because also it had been about like 6 weeks. It was definitely before Christmas since my last podcast episode, and finishing that black April cardigan was definitely a big project that I wanted to share. So I hope you guys like this video. Make sure to give it a thumbs up and give my channel a subscribe, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye!